Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. The earliest sown spring crops are starting to emerge in the past few days despite the cool conditions. Even though the weather isn't great at the moment, planning for the next actions for these crops can begin so that when conditions are suitable, these jobs can be completed without delay. Spring barley is Ireland's largest single cereal crop and is the backbone of production on many farms. Malting barley is a large part of this, and the malting industry will require close to half of the spring barley requirements this year. Management of the crop is critical to ensure the barley meets the specs and attains the bonuses on offer. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Eoin Lyons, the Teagasc Boortmalt Joint Programme Advisor, to discuss all things Malting barley and how management decisions over the next few weeks are critical to achieving these specs. Eoin, when did the spring Malting barley drilling commence? And have any of those crops emerged yet?
Look, I suppose at this stage, I would say that the vast amount of spring Malting barley has now been drilled. And really, there's been exceptional weather conditions over the past maybe 2 weeks or even a bit longer to get them crops drilled. So look, I suppose the very first drill crops did start back at the beginning of February when some growers on the very free draining land, they took that opportunity then to drill their crops during that spell of exceptional dry weather for the time of year. But look, I suppose for the most part, drilling started in around the 18th, 19th of March, with drilling taking place really all the way up to the end of March, depending on soil types and conditions. But I suppose, look, many growers, they were reporting along the way that although there was excellent drying weather conditions, seabeds did take time to dry out properly before drilling could take place. And before it came on, I just took a look at the rainfall for Oak Park for February and March, and there was actually 141 mil fell in them 2 months. But I suppose really the majority of that rain fell in the second 2 weeks of February and the first 2 weeks of March. So there was a significant amount of rain that fell before the commencement of drilling. So that, as I said, that did lead to seabeds taking the time to sow before drilling could take place. So really, growers were thankful to get them good drying conditions at the end of March to make sure that seabeds were excellent.
It's always a bit of a trap on that farmers can fall into, that that there's an awful lot of wet weather, as you say, nearly a month of wet weather. Then it takes up and the ground dries out relatively quickly, and the temptation's often there to kind of get in and get the crop drilled. Do you think that people were tempted in those situations? And I suppose really what I'm thinking about here is that they may well have been in a little bit early, and it can often happen that it's a bit wet underneath. Once you go down 2 or 3 inches, it's a bit puddingy, and a little bit of damage can be done. Do you think that happened this year, or were farmers a little bit better, a bit wiser to it this year?
No, I don't think for the most part that it did happen this year. And definitely I know what you're saying, because I would have seen in other years, and I often tell farmers that when it comes to Malting barley, many growers want to get the crop in earlier for obvious reasons to try and keep the protein level down. But oftentimes what I'd say is, look at your seabed rather than the date, and go by that. But I think just the way the weather conditions came this year, and the promise was there for a good long dry spell, that there was no rush in to seabeds, and thankfully they could dry out properly and get good sowing conditions before the drills started rolling in fields.
Oh, okay. So I just noticed a couple of a few fields close by here, and they are starting to peep over the ground. But you mentioned some of the earlier planted crops. Any idea where the plant establishment is like in those crops?
Yeah, so look, the first emerging crops that were sown around the 1890 to March, they are coming up now. But I suppose they did take the 2 weeks to emerge. And really, that first week post drilling, I suppose it was exceptionally warm. But since then, it has been below average temperatures, and really some very cold nights, down as low as -4 in some cases. So that probably definitely has slowed down progress a bit. But I suppose looking how they're looking now, I would say for the most part, emergence really has been excellent. They've certainly benefited from maybe that bit of rainfall over the past few days. And because seabeds had dried out a bit, but I suppose, look, them cooler temperatures are holding them back a bit. But just to give an example, I just was in a crop in Kenny before I came on, Michael, just to see how it was progressing. So just to give that an example, I suppose the crop in question was a crop of Planet spring Malting Barley that was drilled on March 18th at 180 kilograms a hectare. And so the plant count carried out on that, we saw that there was 305 plants per meter squared. So we're above our target plant population for where we'd like to be. And that really relates to a 93% establishment rate. So if we take it, we're aiming for 85 and we got 93. So I would say a lot of crops sown that are emerging now are kind of in that bracket. So really an excellent result.
I suppose it might have helped Owen that seed was big and bold this year. The 1,000 grain weights were quite large, and I suppose ideally growers should have been putting in maybe more in terms of weight, if you know what I mean, 180, 190 kilos per hectare, rather than maybe other years might have been closer to 150. Do you think that helped in the better establishment?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was something before drilling there that we were trying to make growers aware of, that just take Planet as an example. There was some big ranges in 1,000 grain weight, all the way from 52 up to 60. So really, sort of averaging maybe 54, 55. So definitely it has helped establishment. But I think growers are very aware to try and get their seeding rate right based on the 1,000 grain weight of the seed that they were sowing.
Okay, so it's always I suppose the thing we're trying to get across to farmers is the fact that if you're starting off with the right plant count in the first place, it makes the rest of the season an awful lot easier from there on in. Owen, I just want to turn maybe to the those crops in terms of management of those from here on in. So are we regarding the majority of crops sown on time or sown early in the context of controlling aphids for BYDV spread?
Yeah, look, I suppose just to look at the advice from Teagasc in relation to aphid control and application of insecticides on spring barley. And really the message that we'd always say is that crops drilled in March and emerging before sort of that mid-April timing generally will not require an application of insecticide for aphid control. So look, if we look at this year, as I've mentioned previously, the majority of crops were sown in March and will be coming up before that mid-April timing. So really an application really will not be necessary this year, but you always have to be careful to look at maybe exceptions to that rule in high pressure situations, such as maybe coastal sites where a lot of spring barley would be grown, that their pressure might be high, that an application will be required. And really, if an insecticide is required at that time, and you're looking at using pre-tried sort of that 2 to 4 leaf stage of the crop growth or growth stage, 13 to 15, to get adequate control of the aphids to prevent BYDV.
Look, I think it's worth probably saying that again, actually, just in terms of integrated pest management, in terms of trying to protect the chemistry that we have, but also from the point of view of how society views us, I suppose, as an industry that uses some agrochemicals, that an aphicide, in a general sense, is not required in spring barley this year. Okay, moving on to the next and probably most expensive kind of input that farmers are probably going to go put on this year. And nitrogen, obviously, it's still a vital component to growing spring barley. What sort of rates are the optimum rates, and what's the optimum timing to get that rate onto spring Malting barley?
Yeah, so look, Richie Hackett would have carried out a number of trials in Teagasc in Oak Park, looking at different rates on Malting barley, and really what he would have found was that for brewing barley, an application really of 150 kilograms of nitrogen a hectare, which is 120 units an acre, will be sufficient for growing a crop of brewing barley within the specifications. And really, if we're targeting is distilling barley, that rate would reduce down to about 130 kilograms a hectare or 104 units an acre. So look, that's kind of the range that we're talking about in relation to our total nitrogen application. So really, many growers will probably have put about 40 to 50 kilograms of nitrogen in the seedbed at sowing already. So really, we are now looking at applying the remainder in one split to bring up to either that 150 kilograms or 130, depending on either brewing or distilling crop. Okay. The timing of application, really we'd be looking at sort of the 1 to 2 leaf stage of crop growth to try and get it done early, and to hope that we get a good response in relation to crop growth while aiming to maintain our proteins at a lower level.
And in terms of that timing, does it make any difference whether that crop is designed or destined for distilling versus brewing?
I don't think so, Michael. I think to try and get a good response from the nitrogen applied, really, some people might go at that tram lines visible when they're just about visible. But I think this year, considering that the crop has got in early, we can probably wait till probably the one or when the second leaf is coming through and then apply our nitrogen.
Okay. And there was a lot of catch crops or, crops growing over the winter from the last main crop to this main crop to try and mop up some of that free nitrogen, if you like, that was around in the soil rather than having that leaching into some of the rivers. And some of those crops, given the year that was in it, were quite big, I think, Eoin. Do you think, or how much of an influence should that have on the overall rate of nitrogen a farmer should be putting out?
Yeah, so look, we would have done a lot of work this year in relation to catch crops, and I would have gone through that on a few webinars that we did in the early spring. But look, I suppose in reality, a catch crop can bring nitrogen to the system, but maybe not a major amount of nitrogen for the following crop. So just to give a quick example of a few of the catch crops that we actually tested this year. So we were finding like catch crops that were very good this year, and really a very good catch crop that was sown maybe mid-August after spring barley. It had taken up in the region of 40 to 50 kilos of nitrogen to the hectare. So that's the quart of nitrogen that was stored in the crop and maybe potentially available for the following malting barley crop. But really, the amount of nitrogen that can really be recovered by the catch crop the following spring barley crop is somewhere in the region of 0 to 40% of that total. So really, it's a big range, and really there's a number of factors that kind of influence that, depending on when the catch crop might have been terminated, or if the catch crop had been grazed, and so on and so forth. So I just give an example here. So if we had a catch crop where we'll give, say, an average of 45 kilograms nitrogen a hectare to taken up, we're saying that maybe it was only terminated maybe within 3-4 weeks of the spring barley crop being sown. So we'd hope there that we'd maybe recover 20% of the nitrogen that's in that crop. So that really only equates to 9 kilograms nitrogen a hectare that will be available to the following spring barley crop. So there is that potential to reduce by that much, but in reality, that's not a large amount of nitrogen. So really, decreasing nitrogen off the optimum rates I've already discussed, based on a catch crop being sown in the field prior to the spring barley crop, I think you'd have to be very cautious about doing that. And really, if you are going to reduce, it would have to be by a small amount.
I suppose on one side of that, Eoin, it's pretty disappointing in the fact that all that work and you're only getting 9 or 10 kilos of nitrogen potentially back out of it, which is disappointing on one side. But obviously, when you're talking about being able to capture 40 kilos, that's going into the soil, into the system somewhere. So I would hope a farmer would think that there will be an advantage somewhere down along the line if he continues to do that year on year. And to me, I suppose maybe the other disappointing part, certainly from a farmer's point of view in terms of cost this year, would be kind of going, well, it was a big crop of stuff. I really would have liked to reduce my nitrogen further because of the flipping cost of it. It's just a horrendous cost. And given that, do you think that farmers should be reducing their overall nitrogen given the cost of it, and still be able to grow and deliver the specs of malting barley that's required?
Well, look, I suppose the short answer to that question, Michael, is no. And the reason being really is because, as I discussed already, the total nitrogen applied to the malting barley, it's already at a reduced rate compared to, say, a crop of feeding spring barley. So really reducing that rate any further, it could compromise on the yield potential, and also maybe achieving the desired grain protein through the dilution effect. And then I suppose just to further add to that, it's also important to remember that malting barley, it is a premium crop, it's a premium product and carries a premium price. And as all malt growers know, it's going to be worth more than what your feed crop is. So really, it really doesn't economically justify to reduce the N rate because it is a premium crop, even though, as we see, the price of nitrogen has gone up even further. It's still economically viable to stick to the rates that I discussed in the previous question. And I suppose just quickly, maybe on P and K, I know many growers will probably have their P and K applied, and especially if their P has probably gone into the seedbed. But there would be some growers that may be coming back with a bit of potash by itself, just to top up the rate. And really, just to remember on that our message this year is that to apply crop offtake in relation to your K application in order to try and maximize yield. So what I mean by crop offtake really is that if you have a spring barley crop that's yielding, so on average, maybe 3 tons to the acre, in order to match the offtake of that, we need to apply 85 kilograms of K to the hectare, which equates to about 68 units. So it's just, if you do have potash to top up on the crop, it's just important to remember that.
Yeah, so I suppose it's not all about nitrogen either. There's all the other elements that are in there that all combine together to give excellent yield. And thinking about that, I suppose some of the micronutrients, on the likes of manganese or magnesium, how important is that to spring barley? And if a farmer, either from previous experience or figures out that a field that it's farming this year is low in those trace elements, when's the best time to apply those?
Yeah, look, I suppose the importance of micronutrients, firstly, if they're deficient in the soil and the crop needs them, they're very important. If the crop doesn't need them, they're not important. I suppose that's the simple answer to the question. But if you think you might have a question or an issue with micronutrients, I suppose the first place to look is your most recent soil samples and see if there's an issue coming through there. And as you said correctly, maybe the field history, if you had history of it in the field before, and try to control accordingly. But I suppose the micronutrient deficiency that I'd see popping up mostly, I suppose, in spring barley would be manganese. And you'll see some cases of it in all crops most years, going around looking at crops in different areas. And really, look, there are a number of, I suppose, risk factors that can trigger manganese deficiency in crops. Things like maybe poor seedbeds, loose seedbeds, a low soil temperature, dry conditions or even drought conditions, and also on them high pH soils that many growers in the Midlands will know quite well. So really looking at the growing season so far and just this year, seedbeds have been excellent. As I said, they've been well consolidated both pre and post drilling. So I can't see any issues popping up in relation to maybe micronutrient deficiencies from that point of view. But there's still a long way to go, obviously, in the growing season. So we could see, these lower temperatures continuing and drought scenario. So that could bring forward issues there. And obviously, if you're on them high pH soils, there's going to be a certain amount of lockup in relation to micronutrients as well. So growers will have to apply micronutrients to these type of soils. And if treatment is required, I suppose an early treatment is best to try and as a preventative measure for a lot of these. And really, there's a number of products on the market that can be used. So really, it's treatment early in the growing season. And if you think you might have to come back, then again, you might put it in maybe at mid-tillering with the first fungicide as well. But it would have to be a severe case of deficiency if you had to go with 2 applications.
Okay, so the key thing I suppose, if I'm to pick you up properly, is to do a bit of planning, dig out your soil analysis results. The chances are you're going to get a good indication of what the soil is low in. And I think my understanding would be is that if it was low 10 years ago, the chances are it's low today. So
yeah.
It's something that's going to be with you for a long time, and it's for the most part, it's not overly easy to correct those for the most part, but maybe it can be done with the likes of magnesium. I just want to touch very, very briefly on some of the other jobs that a farmer might be doing in the next 3 weeks around kind of weed control in terms of trying to marry up the broadleaf weed control and maybe the wild oat weed control. What's the best thinking as regards that if a farmer has, and he knows, and that farmer knows that there's quite a big population of wild oats in the farm?
Yeah, look, I suppose in relation to wild oats, for many spring barley growers, it's going to be an issue in many fields, and will need control. And really, there's a few different options in relation to wild oat control in spring barley, and as you said, trying to tie it in with your broadleaf herbicide also. So look, if we focus on maybe just Axial Pro, maybe because that's maybe the most popular herbicide that people will use. And look, I just looked at it, it has an application timing of between growth stage 11 and 39. So it's a broad range of when we can actually apply the herbicide to the crop for the wild oats. And really, there's sort of three different timings that I would see that many growers kind of operate in relation to wild oat control. So over the past few years, I suppose many growers, there's kind of a shift to maybe applying the Axial Pro early, maybe at the 2 to 3 leaf stage of crop growth. And I suppose this kind of timing, it has its benefits in relation to you're kind of getting the wild oat at an early stage when it's easier to kill. But the only thing is to be sure that the wild oats are there, that they've emerged when you're applying it to the crop. And I suppose if you're spraying at this stage, you can also go maybe with a slightly lower rate, maybe the 0.5 litre per hectare rate, and that will be sufficient for control. I suppose the second way or the second approach is to try and apply the Axial along with your broadleaf herbicide, maybe at the 4-leaf stage or to start tillering. And I suppose the benefit here is you're ensuring that all the wild oats they have been emerged and they're there in the crop. But you do run the risk, and I've seen a lot of crops get quite stressed when you put your Axial in with your broadleaf herbicide. It can be quite stressful on the crop, and it might set the crop back that bit, especially if the weather conditions are maybe unfavorable at that timing. So if you are putting in along with your broadleaf herbicide at the start of tillering, I would be ensuring that there's 3 to 4 good growth days pre-application and the same post-application, just to try and avoid that stress on the crop. But it's important that if you're mixing the Axial with a sulfonylurea with an SU herbicide, that you have to go with that 0.6 to the litre hectare rate of Axial Pro. So just to keep that in mind. And I suppose finally then just what people or farmers might go with in relation to the Axial Pro would be to put it in at mid-tillering along with the first fungicide. And the crop at this stage, I suppose it has grown on a bit, and it might take some of the stress out of the crop applying at this stage. But what I've seen more and more often is that you might control the main stem of the wild oat, but the tillers are left uncontrolled, and these come up then through the crop later on in the season, and you don't get full control of the wild oat. So I'd be steering away towards that last timing and trying to get it in maybe the first two that I discussed. And I suppose just one other point, Michael, in relation to maybe mixing the wild oat herbicide, your Axial Pro, with a hormonal based insecticide, is just to look at the intervals that are needed between application of your Axial Pro and your hormonal based herbicide. So if the Axial is applied first, we need to have an interval of 7 days before applying a hormonal based herbicide. And if the hormonal is applied first, we need to leave 21 days before applying the Axial Pro. So that's just something to be aware of, and also not to mix the two in the tanks. They cannot be mixed.
Okay. So the key thing there, from what I'm getting from you there, is that the chances are the farmer's going to know the field where the wild oats are and target them early. And if you go early, you're going to the farmer will get probably the best results for the lowest cost. If I'm to get you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Look, before you go, I just want to have a real quick word around malt and barley. It's not the biggest crop out there. Winter malt and barley, I should say. It's not the biggest crop out there, but look, there's some of it out there. How are those crops looking out there at the moment?
Yeah, look, I suppose most crops are looking well, as most winter crops are. And, typically from the crops I've been in, we're looking at maybe about 800 to 950 shoots per metre squared, which, for other winter barleys might be a bit low, but for the winter malt, it's probably above average based on the data that we've seen over the past maybe 3 to 4 years of growing the crop in the country. I suppose in relation to nitrogen on these crops, most crops now they'll probably have received their full allocation of nitrogen. And really, based on the trial work that we have to date in relation to winter malt, we're kind of looking at 160 kilograms nitrogen a hectare total on them. Our database is about 128 units of nitrogen a hectare. So we are, I suppose, a good bit less in relation to your total nitrogen application compared to a feed barley on them.
And in terms of having that on, just in case people haven't got all that nitrogen on, it should all be on by what growth stage?
Yeah, growth stage 32, Michael. We'd like to have all that nitrogen applied, but because we're on that lower type of application rate compared to a feed barley, that main split probably wouldn't have been split into two. It probably would have just all went on in one go, and that, I'd say, for the most part, has been applied.
And what sort of growth stages our crops are at the moment? 32?
I suppose, yeah, they're probably 32, maybe the odd one, because a lot of winter malt wasn't sown terribly early, maybe somewhere at 31, but heading for 32. So really, we're looking at now, a lot of crops are heading close to get their PGR on, and also along with that to try and get the T1 fungicide on also. And really, just a quick note, I suppose, on PGR is that, winter malt, as I said, its total nitrogen rate is a little bit less compared to a feed barley. So the total PGR that's required is that bit less compared to say a feed barley that might be on a good bit more total nitrogen. So that's just to keep that in mind when planning your PGR regime for it.
And when you say a little bit less, is that kind of, so let's just say the typical amount of maybe turple might be, I don't know, maybe 1.5 liters. Is it half of that, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, there's a few different approaches that growers are taking. So, some growers might be just going solely with a liter of Cycocel, and some then are just leaving and putting the turple on. But I suppose, in my opinion, I'd be kind of going maybe with that liter of Cycocel and 0.2 of Modus before growth stage 32, or at growth stage 32, and that would be the application rate that I'd be going with, and maybe not going with the turple later on, whereas you might be on other winter barleys.
Okay. And you mentioned disease control there in terms of growers trying to get out and put that on. What is there any great disease around at the moment? Is there any panic or rush to get it out?
Look, disease levels are low, and I suppose the cooler temperatures over the past week have helped that. But I suppose as these sort of showery type and rain is kind of coming into the weather now, you might see disease taken off in crops. I suppose you would have seen a small amount of mildew in craft earlier on in the year, but it was very much on the lower leaves, and not to be concerned about. But craft is quite poor on mildew anyway. But really, to ensure to try and protect the new growth coming through on the crop, I think we need to try and get out maybe an azole plus an STHI strab on the crops over the coming days, really, I'd say, to try and protect that new growth coming through.
Brilliant. Owen, look, thanks very much for your time. We're going to touch base with you again through the growing season just to see how all those crops are getting on. So look, thanks again for your time, and talk to you shortly.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
So that's all we've time for, and my thanks to Eoin for joining me on the podcast today. As always, if you have a suggestion about a topic you would like to hear more about, drop me an email at michael.hennessy@teagasc.ie or on Twitter @teagascrops. We always want to hear from farmers and people in the industry about what interests you, so please do get in touch. Finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back to you next week with more tillage news and advice.